Hello there, and welcome to this video guide to The Woman in Black, focusing on Chapter 12, The Woman in Black. So this is it's the shortest of the chapters in the novel, and this is where the true horror and the real emotional punch in this story is nested, as we see the tragedy that unfolds. It also is a chapter that notes the return of the narrator, the 50-something, 60-something-year-old Arthur, who interrupts the narrative flow, kind of adding a level of poignancy to the story as we hear it unfold. The chapter begins in the past narrative, following on almost immediately from the previous chapter, but jumping time frames fairly rapidly. Arthur's saying his farewells to the dailies, and he and Stella are leaving for London. Arthur asks, about the idea that after the woman in black's been sighted, a child always dies, and he asks Mr. Daly, has this been the case? And Mr. Daly says no, and he says, we hope there's an end to it. Again, there's that red flag there that we really should be paying attention to, and yet we don't. The narrative breaks back in after this point, and we are given a lot of information that the aim of this story was to purge the story and allow the narrator to rest. And in fact, actually the opposite has happened. He's been so disturbed and upset by the writing of this story that for many nights he's been unable to sleep, and he hasn't spoken to his family, and his wife is distressed. And there's even a suggestion that he's using the last of his strength. And it's actually made clear that this document is never to come out until Arthur has died. There's an intimation that the very creation of the document might actually lead to that end, but he does say that Esme will never read this, and if she does, I'll be long dead. So presumably, if we are seeing this text, if we enter the world of the text, we're looking at a found document. The only reason we would ever find it is subsequent to Arthur's own demise. There's a rapid summary of their very happy life together, the birth of their son, and then the novel comes to a very rapid, abrupt, sparse, powerful end with the tragic deaths of Stella and Joseph, caused directly by the woman in black, and the novel finishes with her finally having her revenge, and we have an emotional hammer blow delivered to us. Things to notice. This is where the narrative voice changes. Arthur breaks back into the narrative, or the present day Arthur breaks back into the narrative more clearly here. He does it at various stages throughout the novel, but here it's very clear, where he talks not about himself as a character, sort of like as a remove, where we hear him talking about the Arthur in the story as if they're two separate people. Here we hear him talking about himself as the narrator. We hear him talking about how he's feeling about what's happened, and this disrupts the narrative. It makes us hang on for this final denouement. It shows how reluctant Arthur is to relive this, because he knows that the reliving of these events, far from purging them from his memory, in fact might well be the very end of him. And again, we've got this foreshadowing. The foreshadowing comes from that conversation where we know that the woman in black has not had her revenge. She seeks revenge by taking away the children of other women. And to some extent, the attempt to kill Spider, I suppose, is an attempt to sort of take away Arthur's surrogate child, this thing for whom he had come to care. But now, of course, Arthur has greater things at stake, which make him a much more attractive prospect for the woman in black. So in this chapter, we see much more use of the short, focused sentences for impact. Sentences that aren't laced with extensive descriptions. In fact, these sentences are so well placed that they emphasize the emotional impact of the tragedy. And we see the symbolism at work. The horse and cart, the pony and trap, they should symbolize danger to us. They should symbolize danger to Arthur. And really, when we see it, we're in our heads screaming for Arthur to just leave it away. But of course, these events are fated to happen because they're written. The characters have no more free will than any character in a novel does. But the symbolism of the pony trap is made clear here in the novel, that it symbolizes a variety of transitions. And in this instance, it symbolizes the transition from life through to death, from the mortal world to the afterlife. So here we have an example of that stilted. Again, we saw this in the previous chapter, these pauses, the ellipsis, the reluctance to speak out loud. However, we've also got that foreshadowing. We know that this is something that Arthur cannot escape. Here is an example of Arthur, the narrator, breaking back into the story. And again, the hint that we can only be hearing this now because Arthur is dead. Again, another clear indication that he's out of strength, that this is perhaps the last act he will ever take in this life. What is interesting, and what perhaps does lead to, again, the gut punch that is the emotional impact at the end of this story, is Hill has played with the conventions of the ghost story throughout. The ghost doesn't only appear at night. The ghost doesn't geolocate to the source of its angst. The ghost is mobile. The ghost breaks rules. The ghost appears not ghostly. It's obviously supernatural. When we first meet the woman in black, there's something obviously not right, but she's solid. She's in daylight and she's on consecrated ground. Now, all the rules of the ghost story are that she shouldn't be able to do any of those things, and yet she does. She should certainly not be able to appear in London on a sunny day in a crowded public space, but she does. And that is one of the most terrifying things and the most horrific things, is that there are no boundaries to this. There are no rules that it obeys beyond that search for revenge. And here we have that clear foreshadowing in this sentence. Whilst we're told it's a summer afternoon, I could not have been less prepared for what is to come, telling us we really should be prepared, although we can't. And again, the undercutting, the final sequence is so positive and so pleasant and so upbeat that the contrast between that and the subsequent events are so strong. And there, of course, you have the symbolic return of the pony and trap. Here it is. That long, layered, intense description into that short, powerful sentence. And also sound imagery again, sickening crack into silence. And finally, this sentence is very simple. He lay crumpled on the grass below it, dead. That use of the word dead at the end of the sentence, simple and direct, is immensely powerful. I actually find it quite challenging to read that bit out loud. It's just emotive in the extreme. And the last lines of the novel, slowly decreasing in length to that final word, enough. And that short, sharp ending emphasizes the shock and the horror and the power of this final sequence, which is really where the actual crescendo of the horror of this novel really comes. And we've been looking for it throughout the rest of the novel. We've been waiting for it, and there have been some things that have been creepy and scary, but the real existential, emotional horror is encapsulated in these last few lines. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found these chapter by chapter guides useful. The next video will be about the themes and the overall techniques that Hill uses. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.